Hi, I'm Paul J., and welcome to the theAnalysis.news podcast. This episode is produced in collaboration with Other News. Other News is an international press platform that disseminates analysis, insights, and information about global issues in English, Spanish, and Italian. You can find it at other-news.info. Most roads into Bolivia's major cities are being blockaded by thousands of people protesting the third postponement of national elections by a far-right government installed by a coup against the elected leader, Evo Morales. Morales was pressured to resign on November the 10th, 2019, and fled to Mexico and is now living in Argentina. Why did Morales leave? What is the current balance of forces as the situation grows even more tense amidst a raging COVID-19 surge? Now joining us to discuss the situation in Bolivia, the general strike and blockade organized by indigenous groups across the country, and the National Workers' Federation, is from Bolivia, Carlos Orias. He's a Bolivian journalist and editor since 1995. He's worked at news desks in two main newspapers in his country as foreign news editor, web editor, and multimedia chief editor at El Deber, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, in his hometown in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, and as chief editor of La Razón, leading newspaper in Bolivia's capital, La Paz. And once Carlos joins us, he can correct me on all my butchering of these names. And joining us from Buenos Aires in Argentina is Tony Phillips. He works as a journalist for Other News in South America. He was a delegate to the Conference for the Defense of the Rights of Mother Earth in Cochabamba, Bolivia in 2010. He's published 3 books, 2 on finance, 1 on climate, and he currently investigates climate change, energy, and national debt dynamics in South America. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
You're very welcome.
Carlos, so what's the situation on the streets and highways now? What is happening in terms of repression of the protests? So give us a picture of the current situation, and then we'll get into how we got here.
Sure, Paul. Thank you, and hi, Tony. Thank you for the interview. It's really nice to talk to you. This is a difficult time for Bolivia again. We're always used to live at the edge of a cliff and always pretending to be surprised to be again at this point. And this is where we are right now, surprised that we are again at this difficult moment. Today, the president of the government of Janine Áñez, she has signed a law that has put a date on the elections. They will be held on October 18. That's the date. This was done under pressure from the Movimiento al Socialismo, the people that supports former President Evo Morales. They are out in the highways of the country, blocking circulation from town to town since maybe 10 days ago. And this situation and the response by the government and other parts of the society has brought us to this point of tensions again, with the background of a lot of economic crisis due to the closure because of the COVID-19 epidemic. So that's pretty much a crisis over a crisis, and the situation. Well, it's now clear that we have a date for voting again. I think, aside from the tension, the political tension, and the speech that each side is airing and showing. There's a lot of political calculation, not just by the government, but by all of the other candidates, including the MAS, which has I was telling you before the interview, has very, very high possibilities of being like the first the first party voted in the elections. So there's a lot of tension in the country around this again. That's pretty much the situation, and I hope the election date on October 18 will clarify some of the points that are at stake right now.
Now, this is the fourth date in the last few months? They keep postponing the dates.
Sure.
So is there any reason to think they're actually going to keep this one?
Well, it is a law now. The president has signed it, so it's supposed to be in her interest too. She's a candidate, and that's been difficult for the government to have a president and a candidate who has to manage different level of crisis: health crisis, public crisis, economic crisis, and political crisis. So yeah, we have lost 1 year of schools. We had only 1 month of schools in February. Then schools closed, and now the government has closed the educational year for this year. So it's hitting us in different levels. You see the cities there. I can see my city from where I live. I can see a couple of avenues, and you see normality. You see a lot of cars, but there's a lot of people really being hit, and I think poverty is going to return to the country in the coming months. It's going to be really difficult. That's my perception, and that's the situation. Yes.
Tony, I know you follow the situation in Bolivia quite closely. From what I understood, both in terms of reading the progressive media, but also even the business media, from Bloomberg to others, Evo Morales' government was generally considered, I thought, to be doing pretty well, that the economy was doing, compared at least to much of Latin America, was doing fine. And in terms of compared to Venezuela and some of the other places with progressive governments, Evo was kind of considered the success story. Was that true? Was the economy more or less well managed under Morales? And if so, then what happened?
The economy in Bolivia was managed well for Bolivia. It was managed well for the people of Bolivia, for the government of Bolivia. That is not necessarily the case for certain private sectors, where a lot of, certain parts of the system were nationalized. So that did do well for income for the government. It brought in more taxes. Those taxes were used for various things, but they were also used to stabilize the economy and to give money to the poorer people. So in that way, there was stability. There was inflation stability. There was political stability. Evo was reelected again. However, certain groups, especially in the jungle regions, never really fully accepted Evo's protagonism as an indigenous leader.
But just pure racism, but also economics. They didn't like, I guess, the policies of to some extent, nationalization.
I think nationalization was directed to hydrocarbons, so mostly gas that we export to Argentina and to Brazil. A lot of other areas were benefited by the economic politics of Evo's government. I think the failure, there were like 2 or 3, but the 2 main, and I have to add corruption to that, but the 2 main were, first of all, the Movimiento al Socialismo, the Evo's party, did not allow to appear any other political figure that could, be after Evo. So there was no other candidate rather than Evo. And when his candidature, his figure failed, there's these accusations of fraud, and they have been widely, aired. And in this point, the Movimiento al Socialismo broke the social contract of the vote. People felt that their vote was betrayed, and even if they were not at all, supportive of Evo, or just did manage to, okay, he's the president and we'll respect that, but they were not affected to him. A lot of people felt that that the fraud broke that social contract. And that's when Evo Morales' government fell, because it eroded its legitimacy from the inside. Aside from that is the corruption, and well, that's what brought him to this point.
The accusation of fraud, obviously, they denied it. I thought there's a lot of the accusations have turned out not to be true.
Yeah.
What was the fraud, if there actually was such?
We can't know. We can't know, since there hasn't been interest even from the actual government of Janine Áñez. They are not interested in saying, okay, the fraud was 10%, 15%. We don't know how much fraud it was there. The situation was created, and it evolved rapidly. It arises mainly from the cities, which are richer than the voters base of Evo Morales. So yeah, it's kind of a nebula there of what really happened. We don't know the numbers of how much fraud was there, and even if it was a small fraction, obviously, you can say there was fraud and that. But I think the problem was that Evo Morales was, trying to be always the central figure, and he didn't know when to step aside and to renew the party, and renew the speech, and renew the image of his government. And I think that eroded his position.
He had done, I think it was 2 terms, and he was not supposed to do a third according to the Constitution. And then they tried to have that changed in a referendum, and in fact, Morales lost. And then they tried to find a way through the courts. Did people? Was there kind of a general feeling that he was hanging on too long?
Yes, of course. He's the president that has been longer, and like 14 and something years, and people would have respected him better if he stepped aside for maybe 1 term, 2 terms, and then try to come back, to make a comeback. But the Movimiento al Socialismo was too centered around his image, and too centered around his name, to allow any other leader to show up and to come forward and as a candidate. Now they're trying to do that with the former economy minister, Luis Arce, which he's like urban, and he has a good appeal amongst people in the cities. But they could have done it before. They could have done it better. That I think it could have been different in another story if they hadn't made this mistake of being too much around Evo Morales. I think that was the problem.
Tony, so if I understand it correctly, you get this sort of a disillusionment with Morales, and then the far right takes advantage of this. Am I understanding it correctly, as well as some sections, very right-wing sections of the Catholic Church are very involved in organizing the coup? Talk about that.
There was disagreement as to whether or not Evo should stand, but he pushed that through. And in the end, the courts gave way and said, yes, he could stand. It was probably not a good idea to do that. That happens in many countries in South America. It's something. Sometimes it can be difficult to plan for a secession, especially when a party is doing particularly well and there's almost a guaranteed win for the member of that party. As far as the church is concerned, the church has been very vocal. Very recently, actually, I was looking at the United Nations website yesterday, and one of the main people that they were working with died in El Alto. He's a bishop, and he was actually one of the main spokespeople trying to keep the peace. He died of COVID, by the way. He was an Italian who'd moved over there, and he was made bishop by the current pope, and he was made assistant bishop by the previous pope. The church is important, and the church can be right wing. Now, I think one part of that is the current government, the interim government, the coup government, the government that will eventually allow, hopefully, an election, is quite Catholic, conservative Catholic. I mean, if you look at some of the main people in there, including some of the people who are actually standing for election, like Camacho, but also the Minister for the Interior, who heads up the armed forces and the police, Murillo. Both of those are conservative Catholics. And the church seems to be largely on the side of the current government. In fact, when this government took power, Camacho, who was from Santa Cruz, and I'm sure Carlos can fill us in on the details on Camacho, he actually took a Bible to the assembly, to the Congress, and put it down on the floor of the Congress, saying the church has returned to the state, if you like. Now, the reason for that is because the state is plurinational at the moment. That is something that Evo did in order to give more visibility for the cosmovision, for the thinking, the way that people want to run the country, which the Aymara and the Quechua peoples. Evo is Aymara, and he worked a lot with the Quechuas as well when he was working in the coca farms and also as a miner. So he wanted to make the country plurinational, which would give people a chance to have all of the different viewpoints of the different ethnic groups in the country a chance to work together.
And what does that mean, plurinational? What did that look like?
Plurinational means you look at essentially each of the ethnic groups as having the capacity to be a nation. It actually comes a lot from the if you look at the state of Spain, it's broken up into various groups. You know, you've got say the Catalan and the other groups. Each of those groups recognize their own autonomy and therefore recognize their own way of doing things politically and their own policies. So plurinationality is a way of bringing together various peoples within a state so that you can still have a unified state, but different groups working together, each with their own way of doing things.
It sounds like Canada and Quebec.
It is a bit like Canada because you recognize the autonomy of the Inuit people, no?
Yeah, there are sovereign nations that have certain rights on their land, and then the relationship to Quebec. Quebec has its own civil law, its own first language, so it's somewhat similar.
Yeah, there's plurilinguistics as well. I mean, Evo, when he was a kid, he grew up speaking Aymara. He learned to speak Quechua when he was working in the mines, and he speaks Spanish too. So I mean, it's three languages in one. It's important. Now, what that did was replace the republic, and that's what the current government has been trying to do. They've been trying to bring back the republic, and the republic in the traditional Catholic sense actually required certain positions to be to have Catholic people in those positions. So Evo wanted to bring plurinationality, but he also wanted to create a secular state which would recognize the religions of the Aymara and the Quechua people too.
So you have a government now that came to power through a coup. If I understand, there's been a lot of police repression against the Mas supported Movement for Socialist supporters. They're very far out there religiously. It's a real right-wing Catholic government. What's the mood of the country, especially in the big cities, that they may have been have lost patience or not like that Evo Morales held on too long, but look what they got. So what do they think of this current government?
It's a difficult moment. I started by saying that it's a difficult moment, and mostly I think this level of conflict that we have right now is kind of a part of the electoral campaign. It has replaced meetings or big meetings or political advertising in media through activity and through blockades. This kind of actions have taken place in the electoral campaign. On the Evo's party side, the blockades are a way to reunite the voters from rural bases, from the countryside. And the effect it's having on the city is, well, I think it's difficult for Evo or for his candidate, because it's alienating the people in the cities. The people in the urban people is really tired of the situation. But I think that's how the thing how it's being done on this moment. The blockades are mainly the replacement for the electoral campaign. I was saying before that the Movimiento al Socialismo has around 30%, maybe more, of the voters. Well, that's the hard base of voters that always was around Evo. So if you see this year or maybe 8 months of conflict, you will ask why the Movimiento al Socialismo has still so many, such a large base of voters. Well, I think it's because of what Evo, I think it's because of what Tony was saying before. This the 14 years of Movimiento al Socialismo were it got to represent the feeling and to identify the feeling of the people through this plurinational declaration of the state, which includes all 36 nations in the country. People felt represented, and they felt that they had access, and they felt included. So the response is that they are still there around Evo and around his candidate and around the Movimiento Socialismo, and willing to go to the streets and to make these blockades and to challenge this the current government. So I think that's the feeling on the Movimiento Socialismo electoral base. On the other side, on the cities, people is already crazy and mad and angry about what's happening, because people would like to have normality again and would like to go to vote and would like to feel represented. A lot of people don't see the right now. The right at this moment is really divided, and after almost 15 years of Evo Morales, it hasn't been able to unify around a candidate. It has happened in other countries in South America, and it's happening right now in Bolivia. It has 4 main candidates, and they won't unite around any of them. So they're divided, and they will go to vote, and probably Movimiento al Socialismo will win, and that's making that's making a lot of people angry, a lot of voters angry, and feeling disappointed of the situation, because there's nobody to stand against as they would like to have somebody to stand against. We have one candidate, Carlos Mesa, which is is considered the useful vote. If you have to avoid Evo from returning, you have to vote for Carlos Mesa. That's what they say. But the big problem, the big problem on the right is that they still don't have one figure that will unite them all and to stand against Evo Morales and his candidate.
What is the attitude of the working class in the cities? Were they not supportive of Mas, and are they still?
There's an analysis that's around coming from La Paz. It says that also there's division in the MAS. Also the MAS, the Movimiento al Socialismo, the Evo's party, is divided. And what happened in these 14 years is that Evo Morales was he was from the left, but he was a center figure. After all, he managed to keep things, running. He managed the economy running. There's a lot of things you can throw at him at this point, yes, but he kept most of the radical base of the labor, the labor in the country, or indigenous groups, very radical. They had to move aside and let Evo go, run the country. At this point, there's a division where you have the more center Movimiento al Socialismo around the Luis Arce, the candidate of MAS. But there's also groups, and these are going with the Central Obrera Boliviana, which is the main labor organization in the country. And there are a lot of people from left and far left, which are not so peaceful and are moving things towards, more pressure and more maybe violence. So what's happening today is that the Central Obrera Boliviana, this labor organization, has said that they reject the October 18 date for elections. So we have another spin to the to the situation where you have pressure from the labor in the cities.
Tony, the same question in terms of the attitude of the working class, and back to sort of one of my first questions, because I think the two things are connected. Morales seemed to be governing with policies that were like social democratic policies that were more favorable to the workers and the indigenous people in the countryside. So what if he stayed on too long? I mean, I can get people didn't like that perhaps, but given the alternative, being a far right, ultra religious Catholic government, why would they not rally around Mas now?
Well, they did. What happened was in the elections, Evo won. He won in the first round, and the question about fraud was taken up by the MIT in the United States, and they did a full analysis in the MIT of all the statistics that came through from everywhere in Bolivia, and they disproved the fraud claim. There was no fraud claim, but there was a claim of fraud which was supported by the OAS, and that was in turn supported by the US government. And then internally, somehow that was also supported by the Catholic Church and the military, both of whom suggested to Evo that he stand down. Now, he won the election, so he would have won the elections anyway.
Well, hang on. Then why did he stand down? He won the election. So what if the church and even the military pressure him? Why didn't he call on millions of people to come to the streets and defend him the way what happened in Caracas when the coup against Chavez took place?
Mostly because the cities, the people in the cities arose and they were in the streets. They blockade all the cities, the main cities in the country, and they forced the situation to the point where he had to resign because the country wasn't running anymore. The only way to go around that would be to use police or use the military, and that even at the worst points in 2008, where there was a lot more tension in the country, the Evo Morales didn't use police or military against the people, and they didn't use it at this time again. but the cities were closed. We had like 3 weeks of general strike. And when it was the military, it was the church, and it was evangelical groups also. That's another big element.
So did the working class of the cities, to a large extent, they wanted Evo out. They were part of these strikes against the Morales government.
I think the whole notion of calling the working class in Bolivia is not anything like what you would recognize as the working class of Europe or the North America. The differences in wages between the poor and the rich are extreme in Bolivia. There is an executive class. There are people who work in business, and then there are workers. And workers' pay is very, very low. And a lot of the workers are in mining. They're in the coca business. They work on farms. Most of the work, not all of the work, is in the cities. I think one thing to add, though, about what happened when Evo stood down. You ask why he stood down. It got pretty personal. There was a lot of burnings of houses. I went to see Evo here in Buenos Aires, and he explained how his own sister's house was burnt out. And she told him what she thought he should do. I mean, there was a lot of burnings. There was a lot of intimidation. People were beaten. There was a lot of nasty stuff going on. I mean, Carlos can fill in on the details, but Evo was seriously intimidated. And I honestly think he was afraid of much more violence if he didn't step down.
So since the coup, what's been happening?
Okay, well, shortly after the coup, there was a lot more violence. And that violence was largely by the military and the police. The International Human Rights Clinic, the IHRC, which is a member of Harvard Law School, and the University Network for Human Rights, the UNHR, again in Harvard, recognized disconcerting patterns of human rights violations. Basically, they talked about 4 things. They said there was state violence against prosecutors. They're talking about 2 massacres that happened in a place called Sacaba and Sencata, 2 different places. There was lack of impartiality in investigating this and no access to justice. There was persecution of dissidents of any kind of dissent, including people who work for newspapers. And in fact, the newspapers are all controlled or have been shut down. People have even been arrested for that. And there's also civilian and parastate violence. This is something we're very familiar with in South America. This is when people who may or may not be members of the military or the police act separately, but with a nod and a wink from the police. In other words, the police allow certain things to happen which are very violent, which included, for example, taking one mayor of a city, a woman, and stripping her of her clothes and marching her through the city and painting her and attacking her. There's been a fair number of people who've been arrested and tortured. It's been pretty serious. And I think one of the most important things is on the 14th of November in 2019, a presidential executive order was signed by Janine Áñez Chávez, which is her real name. And Article 3 of that said, personnel of the armed forces who participate in operations for the restoration of internal order and public stability shall be exempt from criminal liability. In other words, she basically said whatever violence is necessary to keep public order for her was acceptable. And whoever did that, whether they police or military, will not be prosecuted. That caused a lot of problems.
You're talking about the mood in the cities. One is people are getting fed up with the blockades because life was already pretty tough because of the COVID-19 and the closing down of much of the economy. On the other hand, they have a government and a president who's been encouraging essentially murder gangs and terrible violence and repression. And it's continuing right now, if I understand it correctly. There's supposed civilians attacking the people organizing the blockade, but it's, I think, the kind of civilians Tony's talking about, wink, wink, nudge, nudge from the police, sort of organizing this in one way or the other. So what do the people of the majority, do you think, of the people of the city, or is it so divided you can't answer this? What do they want politically?
Yeah. First, I think when I was out this minute, I was saying that just to close that the former question, there was a lot of surprise at the moment. Back in October, there were like 3 weeks. It happened really fast. It was 3 weeks, and I think the people in the mass, they weren't able to organize to respond or to come up with an answer. It was a moment of doubt. The fraud accusation was all over, and it dislegitimized Evo Morales a lot. So it had an impact even on its own supporters. At this moment, the situation is really different. People I think needs to work. I've been in and out of the city because I'm moving to a rural area, and you see a lot of work. You see a lot of labor in the countryside. People really need to work at this moment. People really need the stability we had in the years past. This situation here with the closing of the economy and the mix with the political crisis is, really it's going to have a real big cost. And I don't know how. I think we're just in the first maybe half of this crisis, because the next government will not be able to stand if it does not negotiate its situation with the mass, because the results of the election will make the mass, if they don't make a president, they will have maybe majority in the Congress. So it will be difficult to govern. It will be governing with the consequences of this closing that we have at this moment. So I think we have like 1 year or maybe 1.5 years of instability that could force my personal fears. It could cause a devaluation of the Boliviano, which would send us into a deeper crisis. So there's a lot of bad weather ahead of us. I think that's what people is fearing most. You see professional people trying to make a living on any little business they have. That's the mood in the cities at this moment. You have firms that are trying to make trying to lower the wages of its personnel. There's a lot of people being sent to the streets because there are firms that are closing at the moment. And it's already a country with a lot of informality, economic informality, people selling things on the streets. So the formal sector is also feeling a lot of economic pressure at this moment. I think that's pretty much the situation for us.
There was a report that the police are not as directly involved in repressing the blockades. They're using these paramilitary, supposedly civilian groups. And one of the reports on Democracy Now!, one of the guests said that there's some report that some of the police are refusing to go attack the blockades. Have you heard anything about this?
Not really heard, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think the police and the military, there was also genuine support for Mas and for Evo Morales during the past years. So it wouldn't be surprised that there would be some declaration about we're not repressing people because we don't feel this government, this transition government is entitled to do such a thing. So I think And you can say it's still half and half, maybe less than half. Okay, but there are still people that support Evo Morales, and the polls have showed that that there's around 30%. It was like 2 months ago. It said that Evo Morales' party had around 30%, maybe more of the vote. After all the political crisis, they still are in that situation. Well, it's really, it's going to be difficult for the next government to really, stand and to really govern during the next 4 years.
Well, one thing I didn't understand, I don't know, Tony or Carlos, after 14 years of governing, how could Evo not know and have a loyal command in the armed forces? How is he not able to put his people there?
Well, basically because the situation in the cities was you had families blocking streets. You had no circulation, no economy running for 3 weeks in the country.
But who were those families? What class were those families from economically?
All classes. You can say it's pretty much, spread. It's pretty much spread in all the classes of the society. The rejection as well as the support. It's really you can't say they're just the poor, just the middle class, just the higher class. You have parts of one, most parts of the other one. You have it's a really complex map. So the situation back in October was the cities were closed. There was no circulation. You had this city where I live, Santa Cruz de la Sierra, is the economic engine of the country. It was completely stopped after I don't know. We never had that 3 weeks closure in this country. Never. So it was an impact, and it was, and the other side, it was really bad managed communication management from the Evo Morales government. They I think after all that they were really tired and really they didn't know how to handle the situation, and they just were each day they were losing some point, and they were conceding this, conceding that. Finally, Evo appeared to say, "Okay, let's go to a second round of voting," and it was already too late. The situation degraded really fast for a well organized response from the government that would involve their support in the people.
Tony, just finally, United States recognized this coup government. The Canadian government recognized this coup government, which, in theory goes against everything they claim to believe about supporting democracy in Latin America. Now you get the elections postponed over and over. And you get a situation where who knows what the atmosphere for the elections are going to be. Is there any even hint from either Canada or the United States or Europe, for that matter, of putting pressure on this government to actually have elections?
I haven't seen anything from North America at all. However, there are two external groups that are working actively to try and get everybody back to the table and get rid of this violence. One of them is the European Union. They have people in there, and they actually, for example, when Áñez wrote the decree, which basically said to the military that they would not be prosecuted for using violence, and that led to two different groups being killed. 20, 30 people dying in the streets, and no policeman or military person being hurt at that time. When that happened, the European Union stepped in and actually helped to calm that and back that off. They were getting involved. The other ones are the United Nations. The United Nations are quite active in there too. And as I said, the United Nations were working also with a bishop out of El Alto in La Paz, who recently this week died of COVID. I think what we're really seeing right now is kind of a panic. The mass still runs the it runs the Congress. It still has more seats in the Congress. Those that can actually get to their seats. I mean, a lot of mass people have been stuck in the Mexican embassy and have not been allowed out. Others are outside the country and fear for their lives. I mean, it got fairly violent there. But one of what's left of the mass managed to work through a law which says that no ex-minister, including the president, and they're talking about the current interim president, in fact, they refer to her as the female president, presidenta, will be allowed to leave the country until it is clear that all corruption possibilities are denounced for the last few months. In other words, anything that had happened as regards corruption in the last few months will need to be attended to before anyone can leave the country. Now, this is something that Omar Aguilar, one of the mass people, actually got this law through. So what you're seeing here is basically they're closing the door behind what is going to be finally, hopefully, they've delayed it so many times, an election that most likely the mass will win, possibly even the first round this time again, because they're very strong people. Probably important too, I think, is to note that they are trying to litigate against the two main people who are standing for president and vice president. So that's, Arce and
Choquehuanca,
the vice president. Both of those are standing, and they're trying to connect them to the violence in the streets so that they won't be able to stand. So again, if all of this works out this way and they close the door behind these people who have only been in power for a few months, but have been doing the kind of legal work that you're not supposed to do if you're just waiting for the next election. They have been actively changing laws. So if they close the door behind them, I think what we probably will see is threats of violence against them. This has happened before. This has happened before with various people. And actually, some of those people have been brought back into Bolivia, even though they're facing charges in the past. They've been brought back into Bolivia and they've been brought back into the government. So I think this is a play from the point of view of the people who are actually in government at the moment, trying to find themselves a safe exit. And it's not going to happen by the look of things. I think there are threats of violence against them too. And I'd like to actually hear what Carlos thinks in regards to that law, the one by Omar Aguilar to close the gate behind.
Well, let me add a question to your question. Will this government leave? It's kind of a Trump question people are asking in the United States. Or will they push the coup further and try to rule in spite of losing the elections? And then the question is, what role would the military play? Would the military insist on a transfer of power according to the Constitution? Or would the military exert violence and protect this coup government? So it's kind of two questions. Tony's question is, what about the threats of violence to the coup government? And my question is, are they really going to go if they lose the election?
Yeah, well, I think what Tony said is related to what I was saying before, that there is this extremist wing on the inside the mass that is now turning out to the streets, to the highways, and could be prepared to do some violence, or to provoke some violence, or to resist some violence, in which case we will be deepening the crisis. On the other hand, if the current government is going to accept the election, well, it wouldn't be the first time that we see one country that votes what the current powers don't really want, and that the results of the election are not put into place. So it has happened before. Given the external supports that this transition government has, I think it's a possibility. They're, as Tony said, they're trying to tie the mass candidates to violence to try to avoid them from being candidates. And that's been at this moment. The other thing is you hear the language they're calling terrorists. All the people who are blocking streets and highways, they're being called terrorists, and there is law being invoked and law being called upon them. So I think they're trying to revert the apparent result of the election before it happens, because it will be really hard to let it go, to let go the power that they have waited so long to get, that for 14 years of waiting, to not be able to hold on to it for more than a few months. It will be really difficult. What will the military do? I think it will be divided. I think that's one of the risks. But on the other hand, you can see that what happened to Evo was that he apparently broke the social contract of the vote. So if you broke it, if you break it again as a transition government, it will be a really tense situation, and we will be maybe closer to violence. I don't really think there's enough enough resentment or enough hate inside Bolivian society as to have a prolonged conflict as we have seen in Colombia or in other countries in Latin America. But I think we could have, like what happened here in 2003, we had the Gonzalo Sanchez de Lozada government expelled after 73 deaths in La Paz. So Bolivia knows about these violence episodes, and it could happen. It could happen again. It's really not out of the question, and that's what everyone fears, and that's what it's inside of political calculation at the moment.
This is my third final question to you, Tony, and Carlos, if you want to jump in afterwards too. How heavy, how direct is the American hand in all of this?
It's not direct at all. The U.S. is playing its cards close to the table. I think maybe Carlos has more of an inside knowledge of what's really going on there. But what we can see is a lot of support for the current government, interim government, which it doesn't deserve. It has never been elected. It won't be elected.
You mean support from the Americans?
Support from the U.S., yes.
Well, I think if you see the actions of this transition government, they expelled the Cuban doctors that were acting all around the country, and they have severed ties with the ALBA and with UNASUR, and they have, then you can see clearly where we're going and what's behind the government. I can say that.
UNASUR and ALBA organizations created partly with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and Lula in Brazil, seen as organizations that were helping to make more Latin America freer from American control.
Yep, exactly.
Also, I think it's important to see that the current government, the current interim government, has also joined the group of Lima, which was the group that was against the current government in Venezuela. So they've moved to the right.
Right. They've moved into the American umbrella.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul.
And thank you for joining us on theanalysis.news podcast, this time in partnership with Other News.